Using a Carfax report effectively can help you uncover a vehicle's history, ensuring you make an informed decision when buying a used car. Hi, I'm Kevin Hunter, known online for the last 15 years as the Homework Guy. Our auto expert, Alex Stevens, is back today to discuss a very important topic for all of you used car buyers out there: how to effectively use a Carfax report from the viewpoint of an automotive expert. All right, Alex, let's go through a step-by-step guide on how to review and interpret a Carfax report. Where do we start?
Yeah, the first thing you would definitely want to look at, Mr. Kevin, is does the VIN number match the vehicle that you're purchasing? Make, model, year, etc. Does all those things actually are those accurate on the Carfax? And then the next thing is I always like to check. Hey, is the odometer correct? If it says it has 50,000 miles, but then you get in the truck and it has 60,000 miles, or the vehicle, right? So that's another.
Or
big
if
thing.
it's the other way around, it's posted as having 30,000 miles, and a Carfax shows it has 50,000 miles.
Correct, right? Those are some questions to ask. And I would always say too, if you ask for a Carfax or something like this, right? And there's a hesitancy to give it to you, or like a delay, or like, oh, it'll take me a little bit to get that for you, right? That's a red flag. Mm-hmm. Okay, that for me, okay, because it should just be part of it. It should be either on the website or talking to the dealership to produce it for you fairly easily. And you can look it up yourself. There's a fee for that, but and I've seen private sellers that I went ahead and bought the Carfax for the vehicle for you. I'm wanting to sell it, so if you can see the history, right? I didn't own it since it was new. Maybe I bought it used, right? But it should be something you should have pretty quickly.
I always tell people, if the dealer willingly surrenders the Carfax and very willingly allows you to get a pre-purchase inspection done on the vehicle, that's probably going to come out good on both ends because they got nothing to hide.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So, and then obviously you want to, as you're reading through the Carfax, the Carfax is not going to be like your golden ticket to Willy Wonka's show. It'll be like a crumb or a little bit of a lead to something, right? So, hey, was this car ever wrecked? Did they mention that? No, actually, the car's got a good, it's a good, clean car. Oh, it actually was wrecked, so it's not a good, clean car. It maybe has a history, right? Those are some things. Was this car ever in a flood? Has it had, been totaled, right? Been repaired? Was it a salvage title at one point? They're showing a good title, but now it has a salvage title, etc., right?
And for our viewing audience, you have to be aware that vehicles that are titled in given states, like let's say a vehicle was owned in the state of Florida, and then interestingly enough, it got titled in the state of Texas.
Yep.
That's a red flag to me because Texas allows scrubbing of the title, believe it or not.
So those are things you want to obviously look at. Hey, if I walk around this vehicle, it's saying it was a perfectly clean car. It looked clean, but then the title tells me it has a wreck on it, and it'll grade. It actually will say minor, moderate, severe, heavy. It'll have a grade
airbag
scoring.
deployment.
Yeah, it'll show you how serious. Like if it's had like a basic little, hey, they bumped a garage door and they put a little dent on the fender. Okay, it had to have a new fender replaced and paint. So that might be a moderate or a minor, or a little scuff on the bumper and went in and got repaired, right? And
what about ownership history?
For sure. I actually just purchased a new vehicle. And at first, I didn't want to buy a brand new. I was looking for used, and I was kind of very particular. And I was actually talking to you about this. I was looking through the Carfax at this particular vehicle I wanted to purchase, and it had 8,300 miles on it, and it had 3 owners
in 8,000 miles.
And I'm like, wow, that's a red flag for me. Where are these owners? So I looked at it when it left the factory, and I went to the first dealership, and then I saw that it was purchased, and then it was like traded in like a month and a half later. And then, what's this again? Oh, it was actually another dealership that purchased it. And they're like, okay, I'm looking through. And then lo and behold, as I went down further, I could see the maintenance records, and I could start to see the truck had been in for a couple recalls. It actually had some parts replaced. It showed what was replaced and serviced. And then I was able to say, these owners, based off the number of owners, this truck might be a lemon. This truck might be a poor, not a very good specimen of vehicle. But I could see that by the number of owners because I could track based off the mileage and so forth.
Sure.
And obviously, hey, if you're looking at a car that has 100,000 miles and it's had 6 owners, okay, that's not terrible. I mean, it's not great. I mean, that might be a bit of a concern, right? But if you look at a car, say it has 100,000 miles on it, and it's had 2 owners, then that's a little bit nicer. Like, oh, hey, it's been owned 50,000 miles by this guy and say 50,000 miles for this other guy. And then maybe you have good maintenance. You're like, hey, this has been a good, solid car. It's not had a ton of issues. And I think, too, with the ownership, you want to look, if there's a massive gap in maintenance or a gap, let's say owner had it for 4 years and there's no maintenance, that means maybe this car wasn't maintained at a ASE certified shop, or maybe it wasn't maintained at a dealership, right? Let's say it's past that 36,000 miles, so like, the bumper coverage is gone, and maybe they opted to start taking it to their local guy they've always taken it to, and they do their own oil changes. That doesn't scare me. It's just that should prompt some more questions.
So besides the number of owners, there's also where the car was owned.
100%.
Some states will use a ton of salt and stuff like that on the road. You can have a lot of corrosion and stuff like that can be happening to a vehicle because it's in a salt zone, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point to. Is if I'm looking at it from a ownership and maintenance, like my brain immediately goes to, hey, I like this vehicle. Let me see the maintenance on that Carfax. I want to know. But if that vehicle spent its first, say, 10, 15, 20,000 miles in a salt belt state, right, and then now it's down south, yeah, I'm probably going to pass on that vehicle because, yes, it may not be a ton of salt life, but it's a significant amount. And you may have earlier problems because it was exposed to higher corrosion, right? So that's a great thing to note. Like, pay attention to that. If it was snowy, salty area out near the coast, a lot of sand, like those are all things to take into consideration.
So then beyond like where it was owned, who actually owned it? So talking about either fleet or commercial use.
Right.
Because if the vehicle is owned by a private person, likely that it's seen pretty decent maintenance, or more likely if it was a fleet vehicle, that might not be the case. For
sure. So like, let's talk about rental cars, right? I've seen like a lot of rental cars. I'm sure a lot of our viewers have rented cars. I know people who, when they get in the rental car, it's like the gloves comes off. They're like, "This ain't my car, and I'm gonna drive it like I stole it or whatever." So like, but rental fleets, rental car manufacturers do have a maintenance schedule. They have a pretty strict one, so they make sure it gets in for oil changes and services, right? So that vehicle has maybe potentially been driven really, really hard, really, really pushed, on its level of care, but it's been maintained. But if I see rental, not always, not every single car, not every single time, but if I usually see a rental fleet or a fleet vehicle on the Carfax, I'm like, this vehicle has definitely had a higher rate of wear or potential, lack of maintenance or a higher rate of harsh abuse, right?
Sure.
So something to note there. That's a great point, Kevin. I mean,
so interesting thing about rental cars. You and I were talking about Scott Madden earlier, and I know Scott well. I know you wouldn't have any problem with us using his name here on this show. Might even actually like the shout out, for a matter of fact. But
good job, Scott.
Anyway, Scott has been renting vehicles from Enterprise, a local car rental place near him, while he's waiting for us to find a car. And we ended up finding him a vehicle that another buyer, one of our hassle-free car buying clients, wanted to trade in. And instead of trading it into a dealer, he's getting better value out of it by selling it to Scott. Scott's getting a better buy by buying that vehicle, 100%. But Scott told me, I'm getting Enterprise calling me nonstop, wanting me to buy a car from them. And he goes, Kevin, I'm on my 4th rental car from these guys.
Yeah.
Because every car I rent from them breaks down or has some kind of mechanical problem.
Yeah.
I was just like, every organization around the country can run through some financial hardship. And the unfortunate truth is that if you own a rental car company and you run out of money, what stops? The maintenance.
Right.
I was like, so you got all these broken down cars and they want you to buy their vehicle? No dice.
100%. Also, say, we talked about a rental side of fleet or commercial. The next thing would actually be, businesses, right? So like if you're, a construction company, right, and you decide to go through the fleet or the rental car model and, rent your vehicles into a fleet, think about some of those trucks or vehicles that are used on a commercial basis, not necessarily a rental car, but commercial use from a fleet. Those trucks could just be really abused, or those vehicles, not just trucks, but those cars could be really abused.
So a lot of people are worried about mileage on vehicles, how many miles are actually on the car. High mileage isn't necessarily a bad thing because it could simply mean the vehicle is used a lot on the highway or whatever the case 100%. Is. But what most people don't know is extremely low mileage for a given vehicle could also present some possible mechanical issues, couldn't it?
Yes, sir. 100%. I think, lower the mileage. It's been less driven, less used. Less used. One thing I would say with that is, hey, oil has a life, both from a mileage standpoint and a time standpoint. Before the molecular structure starts to break down and the additives and things sort of separate, it settles in the bottom of the pan, right?
So just because the car hasn't been going down the road doesn't mean the oil's still 100%.
Good. Yeah, and it needs to be serviced. But that goes to your tires. It goes to the transmission fluid, the brake fluid, the power steering fluid, right? Rubber has a life. The belts have a life. There's the cooling system has a life, not just from a mileage standpoint, but also from a time standpoint. And if you have moisture, so if let's say you're in a cold environment, it's not a heated garage, and that truck, that vehicle, that car, it gets a lot of temperature in it, cold temperatures or hot temperatures, that affects that engine. And if it's not regularly being lubricated or cooking off some of that condensation, you can develop issues. So that is something to note. Pay attention to that. Like, just because it's low mileage, you still want to have it inspected. You still want to treat it as if it was, a high mileage car to some degree. Low mileage, a couple years old, still take and have the fluid serviced. Go and have it, inspected and looked at.
So another thing you can find on the Carfax is any accident history. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that there are severity of accidents. And also, I would say the number of accidents. So if the vehicle says, minor accident 4 times, you're like, holy cow. Yeah. What's been going on with this vehicle that it's been in that many potential fender benders, even if it's something mild, How many times has this vehicle hit a grocery cart or, bump somebody, who's in a right-hand turn lane or whatever? But, so accident history, the severity of the accident, and the number of accidents.
100%. Yep. And I would say, too, looking at the state, we talked about this earlier, like what region of the United States is that vehicle in? Let's say if it is a salt belt car and it's had a number of accidents, like you're going to, the metal from the corrosion is going to start to break down. The gaps will start to open up. There's a lot more variables to that too. Not just, hey, it's had a lot of accidents, but where were these accidents? What states were these in what region? Yeah.
It's been bent and crunched enough times that it's probably having some metal breakdown.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. So I know one of the things that you love to look at a Carfax for is the good old service records and maintenance records on the vehicle.
Yeah, I like to ask a lot of questions. I spent time, how often was the oil changed? What were the tire rotations? When it went into the dealer, is it on a maintenance plan with that dealer, right? Some dealers now are offering that. We're like, hey, buy from us. We're going to give you the next 2 years free oil changes and whatever, right? So those are things I love to look at. And then depending on some dealers and where it was serviced at, they'll tell you, hey, this had the BCM replaced at 14,000 miles, right? You can start to see if it's had some issues. It'll tell you if it's had recall work done. That's another thing to look at. So I love to dig into that. I look for gaps in it like we talked about. I look for how frequently it was serviced, right? And then, we talked about German cars way early in our time,
right?
European. They have a service interval, A service, B service, and that's based off of mileage usually. And, hey, has it had its, 60,000 mile service done? And then if you look at, I had a friend last year looking to buy a Mercedes, a used Mercedes. I believe it was like an 18 or 19. And he said, hey, would you mind looking at the Carfax for me? Sends me the Carfax. I'm looking through it. I'm like, oh, yep, it's had low mileage, as you just described. It was in Florida. It was a snowbird car where they only came down so much a year. It sat in the garage a lot. And he's like, it's super low mileage, but it's had it's already had like its 50,000 mile service, 60,000 mile service. And I said, oh, I know why, because the car sits. And I was able to look at it and tell him, oh, yeah, it's already had the tires, the belts, it's had all this lubricated. I said, I would have no reservation about buying that car because it's already been looked at as if it is a long-term car.
Right.
So, yeah, those are things you want to look at. And if you see major repairs on that should be I don't think it should be a red flag. It should be a caution. I should now ask more questions.
All right, let's talk a little bit about recalls because whether it's new or used, but anytime you're looking to buy a vehicle out there, you should always look up to see if there's any history of recalls and if there's recalls that are unresolved on a used vehicle that you're looking for.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, recalls are a big one, especially if you're buying it from a private seller. I would actually like to point out that is a private seller. If it's a newer car, look at the recall. Even say a 10-year-old car, you still want to look at the recalls. And then get a hold of your dealer. There are some shops that can perform the recall work. There's very few, but there are a few non-dealer shops. But get a hold of that dealer and say, hey, I have this vehicle, I want to do a recall. this is the mileage. Are you guys still accepting this recall at this mileage?
Right.
Or here's the VIN number. Can you tell me if this vehicle has had its recall work? They can look through the database and let you know. So that's a huge thing. And then the Carfax should tell you, hey, yep, it came in for recall work. This is what a recall was. Or Google the current recalls for that vehicle and then ask the buyer, hey, have you had these work done yet?
All right. Well, with all the hurricanes we had in Florida, something everybody has to be aware of with used car always is the potential for flood and water damage. All right, let's talk about structural repairs.
Yeah, if you see something on a Carfax, like I said, we talked about major collision, right? They may not always tell you, frame rail cut out and bent and replaced or whatever. But if you see the word major collision or a large, higher collision, you very well could have structural
airbag
issues.
Deployment.
Yep, stuff like that. If you're going to purchase that car, if you like, hey, I want to get this, I recommend taking it to a reputable body shop or automotive, repair shop and have it inspected.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, is the frame rail bent? Is this vehicle safe to drive? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it was fixed, that doesn't mean it was fixed correctly. I cannot tell you. These are many personal stories of some good friends that have found a really good deal on a car and purchased a car, drove it home. It drove really weird. Asked me to come over and look at it. Looked at the Carfax with them and like, hey man, this is at a major repair. Oh, they told me it was fixed. And more than just airbag deployment. I'm talking about major frame damage, horrible stuff. So just because it was fixed, that doesn't mean it was fixed right.
Right.
You want to spend some time researching.
So we were just helping a car buyer out of the city of Chicago who was looking at a Lamborghini.
Great car.
Very high-end vehicle. And we scheduled Lemon Squad out to look at it. And Lemon Squad sends us back a report and says, the hood and the driver's side fender panels don't line up. And then they couldn't put the vehicle on a hoist, but they have a scope to put underneath the vehicle, and they inspected the frame, and it says it's also got some frame repairs done to it.
Oh, yeah.
Might want to pass on this vehicle because you don't know to what extent damage has been done to the vehicle.
Very common.
And it had a fairly attractive price, but I think that had a lot to do with the damage done to the vehicle.
Yeah, so, really common right now is that stuff, buying wrecked cars from Copart or places like that and fixing them and selling them, doing the basics to get a car roadworthy. Inspect, have a pre-purchase inspection done, have the vehicle looked over if it's used.
And I would say that, a lot of people ask me this question, that how do you know you're dealing with a trusted mechanic when you bring it to a shop that's out of state, out of town, and you don't have a relationship with them? Well, let me just share with you some of my learning experiences, because we've had to help people do this several times over the years, and sometimes it doesn't work out to get Lemon Squad or Palm Car out to look at the vehicle. We just went through this with a vehicle over in the state of California, and I looked up the gentleman's address where he lived, found a shop nearby him, called the shop, talked to them about a pre-purchase inspection. They said, oh, yeah, we do these. They goes, but you're going to need to drop the car off because we're going to need it for about 2.5 hours. I was like, that is enough time to really thoroughly look this car over.
100%.
So, if the guy says, 15 minutes, we're done, not such a great deal. But, no, I could tell by his explanation, and then the fact that they get the vehicle up on a hoist and, inspect the frame, and, they sent back a really nice report on that vehicle, too. So, well done.
Yes.
But people have to be aware of the fact that the Carfax isn't the car Bible. That there can be plenty of things that don't show up on a Carfax report that only an inspection is going to help uncover.
100%.
So you've done plenty of vehicle inspections yourself. What kind of vehicle inspection are you most comfortable with? What does that basically look like?
Yeah, for me, I personally like to start the car up, listen for noises, listen for sounds. I like a full-fledged vehicle. Put it on a lift. If you don't have a lift, put it on jack stands. Lift the car up, look at the bottom, take it for a road test, check the fluids. Use a quality scan tool and actually look at the codes. See if there's any. We were talking about this earlier before the show. Are there any permanent codes inside this? Right, those are all things. Look at the chassis, the suspension. You want to check the bushing. I like a full-fledged deep inspection. The 2.5 hour one is about right on par. When I was doing pre-purchase inspections or vehicle inspections, stuff like that, it would take us 2.5, maybe 3. Depending on what it is, it could be even 4 hours, right? If it's a luxury car, like when we're doing Mercedes and BMWs, Volkswagens, those cars are a little bit more involved. There's a lot more potential, higher cost repairs. So those are a little bit more involved sometimes. A Lamborghini, for example, would be Ferrari. I'm sure would all be higher inspections. So, yeah, I think the deeper inspection is a lot better.
As always, a very informative show. For those of you in our viewing audience, some final tips here. Make sure you get the report beforehand. Yeah. Request the Carfax early in the buying process to save time and avoid surprises. And as Alex pointed out, if the dealer is hesitant to give you the Carfax, walk away. Yeah, just leave it. You can always use a Carfax as leverage in your negotiation process. Use findings like accidents, high mileage, or lack of maintenance to negotiate a lower price, or just walk away, as I said earlier. You can always trust but verify a Carfax, so a clean Carfax doesn't guarantee that the car is flawless without any problems. Use it simply as a guide, not as a sole discretion maker. If you found this video to be helpful to you, remember to give us that great big thumbs up and share it with your friends and leave a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this factual conversation about a Carfax and how to properly use it. Please let us know about your car buying experiences. We love hearing your stories, and great comments always help the Homework Guide community. Also, if you'd like help from one of our car buying coaches when buying a car, please let us know at 701-441-3399. To all of you long-term subscribers out there, you guys rock. God bless you all. I'm Kevin Hunter, the Homework Guy, signing off on behalf of Alex Stevens, the amazing Elizabeth, and the entire Hassle-Free Homework Guide team. Thanks for listening.